The following account was recovered from an unlabeled digital recorder found behind the register of the Route 12 diner after it closed without notice. State Police logged the device as item 14-B. The speaker identifies herself only as a waitress who worked the night shift for 9 years. Her employment records confirm that detail. Her present whereabouts are unknown. The first time I served Mr. Vance twice in the same night, I blamed exhaustion. The second time, I assumed he had an identical twin. But by the 7th night, I knew the truth was worse. One Mr. Vance always entered through the front door at 9. The other never entered at all. He simply appeared at a different table during the dinner rush, with the same clothes, the same voice, and an order ticket written in my handwriting. For weeks, neither man acknowledged the other. Then, one night, the second Mr. Vance looked across the diner at the original, and smiled before the original did. The thing about a diner on a state highway is that you learn people by their orders before you learn them by their faces. I could not tell you the last name of half my regulars, but I could tell you that the trucker who comes through Thursdays takes his eggs over hard because he's tired of runny yolks on the road, and that the woman who drives the school bus wants her coffee poured before she's fully in the booth, and that Mr. Vance, I'll call him that. It's Close Enough took the meatloaf special every single night with the mashed and the green beans, no gravy on the beans, gravy on everything else, coffee black, and a slice of the coconut cream at the end, whether or not there was room for it. You learn a person as a sequence of small certainties. That is why I noticed. Not because his face was strange, because the certainty came twice. I've worked the Route 12 diner for 9 years. We are not a lonely place. People think of a highway diner as some empty box under a buzzing sign, one waitress and a fly, and maybe some are, but ours is not. We're the only real food for 40 miles in either direction, so we're busy from the supper rush clear through to 2 in the morning. Truckers and shift workers and families who misjudged how far the next town was, and the locals who just don't want to cook. On a Friday, I'll turn every one of our 14 tables 6 times. There are 3 of us on the floor most nights, plus Danny on the line and Eva washing, and it is loud and warm and smells like a griddle and burnt coffee. And I mention all of this because what happened did not happen to me alone in a hush. It happened in a full room over a busy counter with people all around, and that is the only reason I'm able to tell it straight. A person alone can talk herself into anything. A person carrying 4 plates on a Friday does not have the spare attention to invent a ghost. Mr. Vance started coming in about 2 years ago. Older man, 60s maybe, though he had one of those faces that could have been a hard 50 or an easy 70. Neat. That was the first thing about him. Neat, in a way most of our night people aren't. Pressed shirt, hair combed wet, hands very clean, nails clean, which you notice in a place full of men who work with their hands. He came in alone, always the same time, right around 9, right in the fat middle of the rush, and he sat in the section I usually worked, and he took the meatloaf special, and he was pleasant and quiet and tip fair, and I liked him fine. He never talked much. He asked how my night was, and he meant it in the polite way, not the way that wants a real answer, and I gave him the polite answer back, and that was our whole relationship for a long time. 9 years on the floor, and Mr. Vance was honestly one of the easy ones. You're grateful for the easy ones. The first time I served him twice, I thought I'd lost my mind, and then I thought Danny had double-fired a ticket, and then I forgot about it, because it was a Friday, and you cannot hold a thought on a Friday. Here is exactly how it went, because the exactness turned out to matter. I'd taken Mr. Vance's order at table 6 around 9:10 meatloaf, mashed, beans no gravy, coffee black, rung it in, dropped his coffee, gone off to run my other tables. 15, maybe 20 minutes later, I came back around the far side of the floor, and there was Mr. Vance at table 11, on the other side of the room. And I hadn't sat him there, and I hadn't taken an order, but there was a ticket up on the wheel in my own handwriting. Meatloaf, mashed, beans no gravy, coffee black. And I stood there with a pot in my hand looking at table 6, where Mr. Vance was eating his meatloaf, and at table 11, where Mr. Vance was waiting for his, and they were the same man, not brothers, not a resemblance. The same pressed shirt, the same wet-combed hair, the same clean hands folded on the table the same way, the same small, polite tilt of the head when he caught me looking. I want to be honest about my first reaction because I think it's important that it was so ordinary. I did not feel dread. I felt embarrassed. I thought I'd double-seated a party, or that he had a twin brother I'd never clocked, and this is what I actually landed on, that I was more tired than I'd realized, and had somehow taken the same man's order twice and forgotten the first. That happens, the running on fumes thing, where you do a task and it slides right off you and you do it again. So I laughed at myself quietly, and I brought the second Mr. Vance his coffee, and he thanked me black, and I went on, and I did not tell anyone, because what was there to tell? I served a nice man his dinner twice. It sounds like nothing. It is nothing. That's the trap of it. It stays nothing, right up until it isn't, and by then you've fed it 100 times. It happened again the next night, and the night after, and I started, without quite deciding to watch for it. What I noticed once I was watching was that it was not random. It was not that I sometimes got confused. There were, every single night, 2 Mr. Vances. He came in at 9, one of him sat down, ordered. And then, somewhere in the next half hour, always during the thick of the rush when the floor was loudest and busiest and no eyes were free, there would be a second one, already seated, already mine, with a ticket already written that I did not remember writing. And they never sat together. For weeks they never even looked at each other. They sat on opposite sides of the room and ate the same meal at slightly different speeds, and paid separately, exact cash, and left separately, one a little after the other, out into the dark toward the lot, and I never once saw 2 of him in a car, and I never once saw where the second one came from. The register was the first piece of evidence I kept. Our system was old enough to complain when you asked it to do anything clever, but it printed the time on every receipt. I began saving both of Mr. Vance's checks in the pocket of my apron. The first always opened within a minute or 2 of his arrival. The second opened later, when I supposedly wrote the ticket. But the closing times were wrong. No matter which man finished first, both checks closed at exactly the same second, not the same minute. The same second, down to the 2 digits our machine printed after the colon. 10:03:17, 9:58:42. 10:11:06. 2 tables, 2 payments, 1 moment. At first I thought that was a register error. Then I compared the cash. Mr. Vance paid with the 20 and 2 ones and left the coins. Both of them did. One Saturday I marked the first 20 in a place no customer would notice, a tiny blue line inside the lower curl of the printed 20. I put the bill under the drawer instead of inside it. 20 minutes later, the second Vance paid. His 20 had the same blue line. I checked beneath the drawer. The first bill was still there. I laid them side by side in the office after close. Same serial number. Same crease through the treasury seal. Same faint grease mark near the corner. Even my blue ink had copied itself, though I had made the mark after the second Vance was already sitting in the diner. I locked both bills in the manager's cash box and took the key home. By morning, there was only 120 inside. The deposit sheet balanced perfectly. That was when I stopped trusting what the room allowed us to keep. We had 3 security cameras, one above the register, one aimed at the front entrance, and one outside over the parking lot. The cameras were mostly there to discourage walkouts. The picture was gray and grainy, but it was good enough to count everyone who came through the door. I stayed after close one Tuesday and watched the recording from 9 until 10. The first Vance entered at 9:04. I watched myself greet him. I watched him sit at table 6. At 9:27, the dining room camera showed me carrying a second coffee toward table 11. The second Vance was already sitting there. I rewound the entrance camera. Nobody entered between 9:18 and 9:31. I checked the kitchen door, the restroom window, the hall beside the office. Nothing. Then I watched the dining room footage frame by frame. At 9:26:48, table 11 was empty. At 9:26:49, a family crossed in front of the camera on their way out. At 9:26:50, the family cleared the frame, and Mr. Vance was sitting in the booth. There was no blur of movement, no figure sliding into the seat. The room had simply arranged itself to include him while something else blocked the camera's view. I copied that minute onto a flash drive. The next afternoon the file was still there, but table 11 remained empty for the entire recording. I was visible walking toward it with the coffee, setting the cup in front of an empty seat, nodding as though someone had thanked me. When I checked the original recorder at the diner, it showed the same thing. The evidence had corrected itself. Only my memory had not. That should have made me leave it alone. Instead, I wrote the times and serial number in a little order pad and kept it in my glove compartment. It is easy to dismiss a frightening thing when it leaves no mark. I wanted a mark it could not reach. I told Rennie first. Rennie's worked the floor even longer than me, and she is the least fanciful woman alive. She has 4 grown kids and a bad hip and 0 patience for nonsense. I said it plain at the side stand folding napkins. "Rennie, is there something wrong with the meatloaf guy, Vance?" And she didn't even look up. She said, "The 2 of him, you mean?" Just like that, like I'd finally caught up. So it wasn't me. Rennie had been seeing it for months and had decided in her way that it wasn't her business. "He pays," she said. "Both of him pays. He's polite. He don't bother nobody. You start pulling on a thing like that, you don't know what comes loose." And she went back to her napkins. I have thought a lot about that, Rennie's philosophy, because there's a real wisdom in it, the wisdom of a woman who's seen enough to know that some threads are load-bearing. But I couldn't do it. I'm not built like Rennie. Once I see a thing, I can't unsee it, and I can't leave it alone, and that is a flaw in me, and it is also the only reason this story has an ending. I started paying attention to the differences, because that's what you do when 2 things are supposed to be identical. You hunt for the seam. And there was a seam. It was small at first, and it grew. Early on, the 2 Mr. Vances were perfect copies. I could not have told you which was which, and I don't think it mattered, because they seemed to be the same in some way I didn't have words for, like one man sitting in 2 chairs. But over the weeks, a difference crept in. And the difference had a direction, and the direction is what finally scared me. The first Mr. Vance, the 9 o'clock one, the original if that word means anything, stayed exactly himself. Neat, quiet, precise meatloaf, coconut cream. But the second one, the one that appeared in the rush, the one whose order I wrote without remembering, the second one got better at it. That's the only way I can say it. Early on the second, Vance would sometimes get a detail slightly wrong. He'd let the coffee go cold without drinking it, as if he'd forgotten it was for drinking. He'd cut the meatloaf into very even squares and eat them in order, and then just stop, mid-plate, and sit very still, and I'd think he was choking and go over, and he'd smile the polite smile and say he was fine, just resting. Once, early, the second Vance answered a question I hadn't finished asking. I said, "Can I get you—" And he said, "Coffee black, thank you," before the sentence was out, in the exact cadence, and I laughed it off, but it wasn't right, and I knew it wasn't right, the way you know a recording is a recording even when it's a good one. He knew the shape of the diner, but not yet the feel of it. He was learning the beats. He was practicing. The night I stopped thinking of him as a confused twin was the night the 2 men finally looked at each other. The original Mr. Vance was lifting his coffee when the second one turned toward him from across the room. For the first time their eyes met. The second Vance smiled. A heartbeat later, the original made the same smile without seeming to know why, as if the expression had reached the copy first and then traveled backward to the man it belonged to. Neither of them reacted. They simply turned back to their meals. But I stood beside the counter holding a clean fork, suddenly unsure which man had copied which. 3 nights later, the original did not come. 9 o'clock passed, then 9:10. His usual booth stayed empty. I felt relief before I felt worry. I told myself He had finally gone somewhere else for dinner, or fallen asleep in his chair, or remembered there were other ways to spend an evening. At 9:24, a party of 6 came in, and every one of us turned toward the door. While I was carrying menus to them, Rennie caught my wrist hard enough to hurt. Mr. Vance was sitting at table 11. He had not entered. I knew that before I checked. He wore the pressed blue shirt the original had worn the night before. His hands were folded. A ticket in my handwriting waited on the wheel. Meatloaf, mashed, beans no gravy, coffee black. The copy had arrived without its model. I did not take him the coffee. I stood behind the counter and watched. After a minute, he lifted an empty hand as if a cup were already there. He tipped nothing toward his mouth, swallowed, and set the invisible cup down. Then he turned his head toward me. "Della used to say I drank too much of this," he said. I had never heard Della's name. Not then. The real Mr. Vance had never spoken about his wife to me. I would learn the name from him 4 nights later, but the copy said it first, softly, with the private irritation of a husband remembering an old argument. Then he smiled, and for one terrible second it was not the polite diner smile. It was intimate, bereaved, real. I called the number Mr. Vance had once written on a lost property slip. It rang 11 times. As I listened, the man at table 11 began tapping one finger against the tabletop, in time with each ring. On the 12th, he said, "I'm not home tonight." The line went dead. He ate when I finally brought the plate, but the movements were different. He did not cut the meatloaf into careful squares. He ate from the middle first, the way the original never did. He asked Rennie about her hip and remembered which of her sons lived in Ohio. He knew Danny had an interview at the casino. He called Evo by the childhood nickname only Evo's sister used. It was no longer practicing one man. It had been listening to all of us. At 10:03:17, it placed exact cash on the table and left. The entrance camera showed the door opening by itself. The parking lot camera showed no one outside. The next night, neither Vance came. The night after that, the real one returned at 9 and apologized for missing 2 evenings. He said a stomach illness had kept him home. I asked if anyone had visited him. He looked puzzled and said no. Then, almost as an afterthought, he said he'd had a strange dream about sitting in our diner while hearing his telephone ring somewhere very far away. I did not tell him someone had answered. That was what I finally understood, and it came to me not as a thought, but as a chill up the arms while I was refilling a ketchup. He was practicing being a person, and he was using our diner to do it, because our diner is a place where being a person is broken down into small, repeatable pieces. Sit, order, wait, eat, pay, leave. Say the polite things at the polite times. A diner is a script. If you think about it, the same lines every night, the same exchanges, waitress and customer, a little play we all perform without thinking. And something had found that script and was rehearsing it. The original Mr. Vance was the model. The second Mr. Vance was the copy, running the model's routine over and over, night after night, getting the coffee timing right, getting the small talk right, smoothing out the seams, and every night it was a little more convincing, a little more him, a little less rehearsal, and a little more performance. And I understood, standing there with the ketchup, where that direction ended. It ended with a night when I would not be able to find the seam, when the second Vance would be as good as the first. And then, this is the part that put the cold all the way through me, and then why stop at 2? A thing that has learned to be one person perfectly, using a place that turns personhood into a repeatable routine, does not have a reason to stop at 2. 2 was just where it happened to be. 2 was the stage of the thing I had walked in on. It had picked a quiet, polite, low-friction man, the easiest possible person to be, a man who wants nothing, bothers no one, follows the same simple loop every night, and it was learning him first because he was the beginner's exercise. The 2 of him wasn't the anomaly. The 2 of him was the practice. I need to tell you the night I touched him, because up to then I could still tell myself I was tired, was seeing double, was a woman working too many shifts. That excuse died on a Wednesday. Wednesdays are slower, and on a slow night, The two Vances stood out more because the rush wasn't there to hide the second one's arrival. I decided, and I'd thought about it all day. I'd built up to it. I decided I was going to serve the second Vance, and when I set his plate down, I was going to put my hand on his shoulder the way you do with an old regular, a friendly squeeze, nothing strange, and I was going to feel whether he was there. That was my whole scientific method. A waitress's hand on a shoulder. He was there, that's the thing. He was warm. He was solid. There was a real shoulder under a real pressed shirt, a real man's warmth coming through the cotton, and he turned his head and gave me the polite smile and said, "Thank you, that's kind," in the exact right cadence, warm and a little shy, and it was perfect. It was completely perfect, and it was the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me, because I had touched him precisely to prove he was a phantom, and instead I had proved he was real. He was as real as the first one. He was becoming as real as anyone. And the original, across the room, at his usual table, was eating his meatloaf and did not look up, did not react, did not seem to know or care that his double was 30 feet away, learning to be him. Except for that one borrowed smile, the original never acknowledged the copy. That, more than anything, told me the original wasn't in on it. The original was just a man having his dinner, being quietly, patiently strip-mined for the pattern of himself, and he didn't know. I checked later as much as I could. I got the first Vance talking one slow night, really talking, not the polite exchange, and he was a widower who'd moved out to the county after his wife passed, lived alone, didn't sleep well, and came to the diner every night because, he said, "It's the 1 hour I'm around people and don't have to be anybody in particular." And I want you to sit with that, because I have, many nights since. I don't have to be anybody in particular. He came here to stop being a person for an hour, to dissolve into the routine, to be just a customer, an order, a chair. He'd made himself into a script on purpose, out of grief, because being fully himself alone in that house was more than he could carry. And the thing had found him because he'd made himself findable. He'd worn himself down to a pattern, and a pattern is a thing that can be copied. So now I knew what it was, and I knew where it was going, and I had a decision to make, and here is where I have to tell you that I made it alone. I didn't gather the staff. I didn't tell Rennie my plan, because Rennie would have talked me out of it, and I didn't tell Danny or Evo, and I didn't call anybody, because who would I call, and to say what? There was no one to help me, and there was no ritual to perform, and there was no thing to burn or seal. There was just me, and a pattern that was learning to be a man, and a quiet, grieving widower who was the pattern's textbook without knowing it. The whole weight of it came down to one waitress at one counter deciding what to do, and that is exactly how it should have been, because I'm the one who saw it, and seeing a thing makes it yours. I thought about a lot of options that were really no options. I thought about refusing to serve the second one, but Rennie'd been serving him for months, and it hadn't stopped anything. The thing didn't need my cooperation, it just used it. I thought about warning the first Vance, but warn him of what? That a copy of him ate dinner across the room? He'd think I was cruel or crazy, and either way, it wouldn't stop the copying, because the copying wasn't happening to him in any way he could feel. It was happening to the pattern he'd carved himself into. And that, finally, is where the answer was. The thing wasn't copying a man. It was copying a routine. It could only rehearse because there was a script to rehearse the same man, same time, same order, same beats, night after night after night, a loop stable enough to practice against. The second Vance was getting better because the first Vance was so reliably, so grievingly the same. So I broke the loop. Not the thing's loop, I couldn't touch that. The first Vance's loop, the real one, the man's. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like a waitress meddling in a lonely old man's life. But it was the only lever I had. And I want to describe exactly what I did, because it's the whole ending, and it is very small. The next night, the real Mr. Vance came in at 9 and sat at his table, and instead of taking his order and letting the script run, I sat down across from him. On the clock, in the middle of my shift, I sat down in his booth, which I have never done with a customer in 9 years, and I said, "Mr. Vance, I'm not going to bring you the meatloaf tonight." and he blinked at me, and I said, "You've had it 700 nights. I've watched you. You come in here to disappear, and I've decided I'm not going to let you tonight." And I did the thing that felt the most dangerous, the thing that was the actual weapon. I made him be somebody in particular. I asked him about his wife. By name I'd learned her name, Della, on the slow night, and I used it. I said, "Tell me about Della," and I would not let him give me the polite deflection. And I sat there while my other tables filled up, and Rennie shot me a look that could strip paint, and I made that man talk about his dead wife, really talk, until his voice broke, until he was not a routine anymore, but a specific grieving human being, having a specific unrepeatable conversation he had never had before, and would never have again in the exact same way. I made him unpredictable. I made him particular. I broke the script by making him a person, which was the one thing he'd come here to stop being, and the one thing a pattern cannot copy, because you cannot rehearse a moment that only happens once. The second Vance never appeared that night. I watched for him the whole shift through the rush past midnight, and he did not come, and there was only the one Mr. Vance, red-eyed and lighter somehow, eating a grilled cheese I brought him instead of the meatloaf, because I wanted even the food to be different, wanted every beat off its mark. And when he left, he took my hand in both of his clean hands and thanked me in a voice with no cadence to it at all, just a shaky, real voice, and went out into the dark. He kept coming after that, but I never let him settle back into the loop. I moved his table around. I changed what I brought him. I asked him things. I made him a regular in the real way, the way where you know a person instead of an order. And Rennie eventually understood what I was doing, without my ever explaining it, and started doing it too, not as a ritual, just as kindness with a purpose underneath it. And the second Vance never came back. The pattern had nothing left to practice against. You cannot copy a man who is being surprised by his own life. I don't know where the thing went. That's the honest ending, and I won't dress it up. I don't think I killed it. You can't kill a thing you never really saw, a thing that was only ever a very good copy of a lonely man's evening. I think it went looking for another loop, somewhere else, some other diner or laundromat or waiting room, some other person who'd worn themselves down to a repeatable groove out of grief or habit or exhaustion. Because those people are everywhere, we are all half tempted to become our routines. It's easier than being particular. It costs less. I broke the one loop I could reach. That's all. That's the whole of what one waitress at one counter could do. But I'll tell you what I do now, and it's not a rule on a whiteboard, and it's not a thing the whole staff chants. It's just mine. When I catch a regular going too smooth coming in at the same minute, ordering without looking at the menu, giving me the same polite nothing every night, wearing a groove into the same chair, I sit down across from them just for a second, and I ask them something they won't have an answer ready for. Their mother's name, where they'd go if they could go anywhere, what they were like at 17. I make them, for 1 minute, be somebody in particular. I tell myself it's just being friendly. Mostly it is. But part of me is checking the room every night, in the thick of the rush when no eyes are free, to make sure there's only ever one of each of them. So far, there always has been, until last Tuesday. I came in at 4 for the supper shift and found an order pad lying open beside the register. My name was written at the top of the page. Under it was my usual staff meal, grilled chicken, rye toast, coffee with 1 sugar. I had not written it. Rennie said the pad had been there when she arrived. Danny thought I had stopped in during the morning because someone who looked like me had sat in the last booth for almost an hour. I told him I had been asleep at home. He laughed, then stopped when he saw my face. He said the woman had worn my uniform, even though I keep it in my locker. She had known everyone's name. She had asked Danny how his interview went and reminded Ivo that his sister's birthday was Friday. She had not ordered from anyone. She had simply sat there watching the staff prepare for lunch, moving her lips a fraction of a second before each of them spoke. The morning camera showed an empty booth. At 9:26 that night, during the rush, I saw myself reflected in the stainless steel panel behind the coffee machine. The reflection was not behind the counter. It was sitting at table 11. She had my face in my apron and the burn mark on my left wrist. A plate of grilled chicken sat untouched in front of her. She held a coffee cup exactly the way I hold one when it is too hot, thumb hooked through the handle, forefinger pressed against the rim. No one else looked at her. No one else seemed able to see that table at all. Then she asked a customer the question I had started asking all my regulars. "What were you like at 17? She used my voice, not an imitation. My voice including the little catch in it when I am tired. The customer answered her. She listened with the patient expression I had practiced, the expression meant to make a person feel particular. And I understood what I had done wrong. I had mistaken variation for protection. I thought unpredictable questions broke the script. But I had asked them often enough that kindness itself had become my routine. Sit across from them, ask something personal, listen, make them real, check the room. The thing had not been driven away. It had moved to the person who was paying the closest attention. My reflection raised its coffee. Before it drank, my own hand lifted the pot behind the counter. I stopped it halfway. Across the room, she stopped too. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then she smiled. I did not. That is why I am making this recording instead of going home. I have changed everything I can think to change. I switched sections with Rennie. I left through the kitchen instead of the front. I drove south when my house is north. None of it helped. Every reflective surface I passed showed her a little closer. In the pie case, she was standing by the register. In the restroom mirror, she was outside the stall. In my rearview mirror, she was sitting behind me, though the back seat was empty when I turned around. I came back to the diner because this is where the pattern began, or where I first noticed it. The lights are off now. The doors are locked. There is no one here but me. I put the marked order pad and the 2 receipts beside this recorder. If they are gone when someone finds it, believe that they were here. If there is only 1 receipt, believe there were 2. I can hear a key touching the lock on the other side of the front door. I have the only key. Whoever comes in will know where the switches are. She will know the alarm code. She will know that the 3rd floorboard behind the counter squeaks and that the coffee machine needs 2 strikes on the left side before it heats. She will know every small certainty that makes this place mine. And if she tells you she worked the Route 12 diner for 9 years, ask her something I would never have an answer ready for. Do it before she asks you first.